mayoral candidate will be on the general election ballot despite an attempt to block her candidacy by an ally of current Mayor Tiffany Henyard, who is
a mayoral candidate being challenged. The saga surrounding embattled South suburban politician Tiffany Henyard.
Troubling allegations against Tiffany Henyard's administration deepen public outrage. The ongoing investigation into Tiffany Henyard's administration has exposed alarming accusations of financial misconduct, with sources highlighting a blatant disregard for legal and ethical standards. Current and former employees allege that funds allocated for community projects have mysteriously vanished, reflecting what they describe as a systemic pattern of concealment and fraud. An anonymous insider revealed invoices for certain expenses were either incomplete or fabricated, obscuring where funds were actually allocated. It feels like we hit a brick wall every time we ask for transparency, one employee lamented, voicing frustration shared by many in Dalton and Thornton Township. These allegations have amplified demands for comprehensive audits, with residents and officials calling for full transparency and accountability to address the deepening crisis. Public trust has eroded further as lawsuits against Henyard accumulate, casting doubt on the township's ability to function effectively. At a recent town hall meeting, one resident expressed a sentiment echoing throughout the community. She's using every resource to fight for herself, not for us, highlighting the growing perception that Henyard's focus has shifted from serving constituents to salvaging her reputation. Thornton Township employees point to the ongoing insurance crisis as emblematic of Henyard's neglect. Essential programs such as senior transportation and community outreach remain shuttered due to unresolved issues with lapsed insurance, leaving vulnerable residents without critical support. Once lifelines for low-income families and seniors, these services are now casualties of administrative dysfunction, exacerbating the hardships of those most in need. The financial instability resulting from these controversies has left Dalton and Thornton Township in near paralysis. Lawsuits, investigations, and mounting public distrust have created an atmosphere of chaos that threatens basic governance. Critics argue Henyard's inability or unwillingness to address these crises has plunged both jurisdictions into turmoil, with essential programs halted and financial mismanagement eroding the township's ability to meet its obligations. Community disillusionment is at an all-time high as residents bear the brunt of leadership failures. Calls for audits, investigations, and systemic reforms grow louder, reflecting a community desperate for stability and accountability. Henyard's administration, once a promise of progress, now symbolizes the devastating consequences of mismanagement and neglect. Whether these demands will lead to meaningful change remains uncertain, but for many, Henyard's tenure serves as a cautionary tale of how leadership missteps can devastate a community.
Tiffany Henyard was not at the hearing here today. Neither was her attorney, and she was not made available for a...
Tiffany Henyard, from trailblazer to embattled leader. Once hailed as a groundbreaking leader in Dalton and Thornton Township, Tiffany Henyard now faces mounting controversies that threaten to derail her political career. Her inspiring rise as a young Black leader, championing transformation, equity, and inclusion, has been overshadowed by allegations of fiscal mismanagement, ethical violations, and federal investigations. Henyard's early tenure was marked by promises of inclusive progress and dynamic governance. She shattered barriers and garnered widespread support as a symbol of hope and change. However, her administration has become embroiled in scandals, including accusations of misallocating township funds and engaging in questionable financial dealings. These issues have eroded the trust of constituents who once viewed her as a beacon of progress. Public opinion has shifted sharply against Henyard. Lawsuits, contentious board meetings marred by acrimony, and leaked internal disputes paint a picture of growing discord within her administration. Federal inquiries have intensified scrutiny, amplifying calls for accountability from a community increasingly disillusioned by her leadership. Critics argue Henyard has not only failed to deliver on her promises, but has jeopardized the systems she pledged to reform. Allegations of fiscal impropriety and procedural misconduct have dominated headlines, raising questions about her governance and ethics. Former allies have joined the chorus of dissent, portraying Henyard as a leader whose once promising trajectory has been derailed by personal lapses and systemic failures. Supporters, though dwindling in number, maintain that much of the backlash stems from entrenched resistance to her reformative agenda. They argue Henyard faces systemic barriers that have historically hindered marginalized leaders. Yet, this narrative of systemic inequity struggles to counter the weight of allegations against her administration. The public's dissatisfaction has been evident in protests, petitions demanding her resignation, and increasingly hostile township meetings. Constructive dialogue has given way to infighting and personal attacks, further fracturing Henyard's administration. Leaked memos and whistleblower reports reveal a leadership struggling to maintain stability amidst relentless challenges. Financial audits and federal investigations have deepened public distrust, with accusations of misused funds and speculation about broader governance issues. These controversies have left Henyard's supporters hard-pressed to defend her leadership against mounting evidence of missteps. Henyard's fall from grace serves as a cautionary tale about the burdens of public office, particularly for leaders facing limited resources and intense scrutiny. Once celebrated as a pioneer, she now represents the precarious position of those striving for transformational leadership in a polarized and resource-constrained environment. Media portrayals, often sensationalized, have further damaged Henyard's reputation. Early depictions of her as an innovative and determined leader have given way to narratives of a figure overwhelmed by the dual challenges of managing Dolton and Thornton Township. Critics argue these portrayals reflect the gap between her aspirations and the harsh realities of governance. The controversies surrounding Henyard highlight the fragility of public trust and the challenges leaders face in fulfilling bold promises. Her ability to navigate this crisis will determine whether she can restore her reputation and salvage her career. For Henyard, this is a pivotal moment, a chance to redefine her legacy as one of resilience and redemption, or risk being remembered as a cautionary example of leadership undermined by controversy. As lawsuits, federal scrutiny, and public dissatisfaction converge, Henyard must confront the growing calls for transparency and accountability. Whether she can weather this storm remains uncertain, but the outcome will undoubtedly shape her legacy and serve as a broader reflection of the challenges faced by leaders in today's polarized political landscape.
Behind me, the doors are locked here, and there's a sign on the building right now that says it's closed for how long? Neither residents nor employees.
Tiffany Henyard skips key meetings amid escalating crises in Dolton and Thornton Township. Earlier this week, embattled Dolton Mayor and Thornton Township Supervisor Tiffany Henyard sparked public outrage by skipping two critical meetings, one in Dolton and an emergency session in Thornton Township. Henyard cited alleged credible threats against herself and other officials as the reason for her absence. However, widespread skepticism has emerged as neither trustees nor the public appear to have been informed of these threats. Her absence drew sharp criticism from both the Dolton Village Board and frustrated residents, who accused her of shirking responsibilities during a time of crisis. Trustee Jason House, who chaired the Dolton meeting in Henyard's absence, stated that neither he nor the board had any evidence to substantiate her claims. Meanwhile, angry constituents filled the chambers, voicing their frustrations directly. One resident remarked, "You talked about being the dream once, but Tiffany, you're a nightmare," while another added sarcastically, "Come to work, sis." The Dolton meeting proceeded despite Henyard's absence, but the anger from residents highlighted a deeper collapse in governance under her leadership. Critics have accused her of abandoning her duties when decisive action is most needed, further eroding public trust. The situation was equally dire in Thornton Township, where an emergency meeting was called to address pressing issues, including the township's lapsed insurance policy. Without coverage, essential services like senior transportation and community programs have already ceased operations, leaving vulnerable residents without critical resources. Trustee Chris Gonzalez, who called for the meeting, waited 15 minutes for Henyard to appear. When she failed to arrive, the session could not proceed, deepening the township's disarray. Gonzalez later voiced his frustration, stating, "We're on a toll road of chaos right now, and unfortunately, the residents are the ones paying the tolls." The lapsed insurance policy has caused widespread disruption, directly impacting those who rely on township services. residents have expressed indignation over what they see as Henyard prioritizing self-preservation over effective leadership. This sense of abandonment has only been exacerbated by a broader perception of administrative neglect, with many accusing Henyard of deflecting blame rather than addressing the crises at hand. Her absence from these critical meetings adds to an already long list of controversies surrounding her administration, including allegations of financial mismanagement, federal investigations, and widespread dysfunction. Trustees and former allies argue that these incidents reflect a leader either unwilling or unable to confront the challenges facing her constituencies. Community frustration has spilled into the public sphere, with packed meetings and impassioned speeches underscoring the growing discontent. Critics argue that Henyard's leadership, once heralded as a beacon of change, now symbolizes the dysfunction she vowed to overcome. The leadership vacuum Henyard has created is deepening public distrust and exacerbating the precarious state of governance in both Dolton and Thornton Township. As essential services collapse under administrative neglect, residents and trustees are demanding accountability, transparency, and a renewed commitment to leadership. Whether Henyard can recover from this mounting crisis remains unclear. For now, her communities are bearing the brunt of what many see as a failure of leadership during their time of greatest need.
And no comment from Mayor Tiffany Henyard. Voters here will first head to the polls in February for the primary election, then the general mayor.
Speculation mounts around Tiffany Henyard amid allegations of misconduct. Speculation continues to swirl around Dolton Mayor and Thornton Township Supervisor Tiffany Henyard's decision to skip key meetings, with many attributing her absence to mounting pressure from a government inquiry into alleged misconduct. Reports suggest financial mismanagement has plagued her administration for months, and insiders hint that formal indictments may be imminent. Critics highlight a string of scandals tarnishing Henyard's reputation, including allegations of mismanagement, misuse of township funds, and extravagant spending that has left Dolton and Thornton Township in financial disarray. A glaring example came to light when Lori Lightfoot, Chicago's former mayor, revealed Dolton's general fund carried a staggering negative balance of more than 3.5 million currency units. Further fueling outrage is a single-day spree involving $440,000 worth of Amazon purchases, none of which have been accounted for or justified. These revelations have intensified public anger, with residents and officials questioning how such fiscal irresponsibility could happen under Henyard's watch. Critics argue this reflects not only incompetence, but also a blatant disregard for the transparency and accountability she once promised. Henyard's perceived misuse of public funds is particularly galling as essential services, including senior transportation and community programs, have been forced to shut down due to budgetary constraints. The growing disconnect between her leadership and the needs of her constituents has become painfully evident. Despite these mounting allegations, Henyard has remained largely silent, offering little explanation or reassurance. Her recent absences are widely seen as an attempt to avoid addressing the crises, further eroding trust in her leadership. Dolton and Thornton Township are now grappling with a governance crisis, struggling to maintain basic operations amid financial turmoil. Observers see these failures as symptomatic of deeper systemic issues within Henyard's administration, where accountability and financial prudence appear sidelined in favor of personal and political interests. Calls for immediate investigations and audits have grown louder, with residents demanding answers about the misuse of public funds during a time of critical need. As scrutiny intensifies, Henyard's ability to lead effectively is in serious doubt. Her reluctance to engage with the public or government peers has fueled calls for her resignation. For many, her tenure has become a cautionary tale of how promises of transformational leadership can unravel under the weight of mismanagement and neglect, leaving Dolton and Thornton Township facing an uncertain and challenging future.
A community at its breaking point, desperate for a return to stability and effective governance in the face of overwhelming adversity.
To govern, to provide a way, provide services, and we're not doing that because they're stalling government, realistically, because they can have
the unraveling of Tiffany Henyard's administration, a governance crisis. Tiffany Henyard's tenure as a local leader has spiraled into a political debacle marked by allegations of misconduct, infighting, and growing public outrage. Once seen as a rising star, Henyard now faces accusations of prioritizing personal interests over her duty to serve, a sentiment echoed by former allies who are distancing themselves from her troubled administration. Insiders report a mass exodus of staff, citing her erratic leadership style and deepening morale issues within her administration. This internal chaos reflects the broader turmoil in Dolton and Thornton Township, with many speculating that Henyard's political career is unraveling. The dysfunction extends to Thornton Township's governing board, where trustees like Harmon Carley and Chris Gonzalez have skipped meetings to block Henyard from appointing an ally to a vacant seat. Henyard accuses the trustees of stalling governance, claiming their actions have delayed critical insurance renewals. Meanwhile, skyrocketing insurance costs and diminished coverage have placed an increased burden on taxpayers. The standoff has paralyzed local governance. Essential services, including senior transportation, street maintenance, and animal control, remain neglected. Delayed snow removal and other unresolved issues further frustrate constituents. Critics argue that Henyard's focus has shifted to legal battles rather than addressing governance challenges, with lawsuits ranging from her removal from the Democratic ballot to accusations of trustee conspiracies. Public protests have intensified, with demonstrators accusing Henyard of squandering a rare opportunity to lead effectively. Once celebrated as the first woman and youngest mayor in Dolton's history, her tenure has been overshadowed by scandals, mismanagement, and allegations of corruption. Reports of late rent payments and eviction proceedings have added to her credibility woes, with her landlord seeking over $13,000 in unpaid rent and damages. Allegations of financial mismanagement, including missing project funds, fabricated invoices, and misappropriated resources, have fueled calls for audits of Dolton and Thornton Township. Trustees opposing Henyard label her leadership a liability, citing inflated insurance costs and governance failures as evidence that taxpayers are worse off. Her absences from critical meetings, purportedly due to safety concerns, have further eroded trust. Critics argue these absences are calculated moves to avoid accountability, especially as no evidence has substantiated the threats she claims to have received. Henyard's defeat in the Democratic caucus for Thornton Township Supervisor has amplified scrutiny, with detractors framing the loss as a public rejection of her leadership. Allegations of manipulation within her administration and rumors of internal scandals, including a leaked audio tape involving inappropriate behavior, have added to the chaos. As the February primary approaches, Henyard faces mounting legal, political, and public challenges. Her administration, once seen as a potential turning point, now risks being remembered as a cautionary tale of mismanagement and unfulfilled promises. With community frustration at a boiling point, the question remains, who will step forward to rebuild and restore trust in Dolton and Thornton Township? For now, residents brace for more turmoil in what has become an unrelenting saga.